Hi everyone, I'm Zoe from the Writing Center, and today I'll be talking with you about how to write case studies. So first things first, some general tips. Number one is to be concise. You don't have to extend your writing for pages and pages like you would have to for a research paper. They don't have to be long. And also, you only should include what the reader needs to know. So you don't have to have a bunch of outside sources or a bunch of maybe unnecessary information or fluff. You just have to kind of answer the questions that you need to answer in each section. And the second tip is that you can use first person. So even though this is formal writing for a professor, it's not the same as maybe some other formal academic writing where you're not allowed to use first person, especially because it'd be really hard to talk in the methods section about what you're doing or talk about what you think will happen in the introduction if you don't use first person. The third tip is that you don't have to write the sections in order. In fact, it can be harder to write them in order, and I'll talk a little bit later about the recommended order to actually write them in. And if you get stuck on one section, it's okay to stop there and work on another, especially because the questions are kind of all interrelated. Working on a different section could then help you figure out what you should include in the other one. And the last tip is to double check for anything specified in the instructions that you need to include. Because I know sometimes in the instructions, your professor will specify that you need a graph in a section, or you need something specifically to answer in one section. So just make sure that you're actually doing that. So then, what are the parts of a case study? There are four. There's the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And you'll notice two are highlighted in blue and two are highlighted in pink. These are kind of split into two subcategories that I'll talk about now. So the first one is pink, which is just reporting what happened. So these are the methods and the results sections. In these ones, you don't have to give any opinions or give any implications of your analysis. You're just telling the reader what you did and then what results you got from what you did. So basically, you're just stating the facts. So then in the methods section, what should you include? I have a list here of questions to ask, and you should answer all of these in the section. So first is, what data do I have? And then looking more specifically, what are the relevant variables out of this entire data? And then also look at where is the data from. So basically, these are things that you should figure out while you're looking at the assignment sheet, especially because a lot of times your professor will have where to find the data and what you're looking at on there. So then you can just write this right away. And then while you're thinking about that and getting the data and then writing this section, you can also start thinking about what statistical tests did I use, or if you do this beforehand, what statistical test should I use? So basically, if you do this first, which is what I recommend, even before you do anything, this basically gives you time to think about how you're going to approach your assignment. And then next is the results section. So this you can also pretty much do straight away after you run the tests, because you don't really have to think about what anything means. You're just reporting the numbers. So the questions to ask, what test did I use, and then go and look at the corresponding template that your professor has given you, because that'll tell you basically exactly what numbers you should put in where, and that's pretty much all you have to do for this section. Now, if you need a graph, ask yourself, where would a graph be beneficial? And my tip for this is to show, don't tell. So if there are any sections where you think, this is going to take a really long time to explain this, but it is interesting to look at, just put a graph in if it's going to make it a lot easier. That way you don't have to waste like an entire paragraph or waste 20 minutes trying to explain something that could just be shown in a graph. It's like on the right side of the screen here, I just have an example. It's just a random graph with a bunch of different numbers that a value could be, and then the count of them. So basically, if there was a data set with like a bunch of different numbers that sometimes repeat, it would be really hard to explain to someone, especially if there's no clear trend. So like, it's not like most of them are negative or most of them are positive or most of them are around zero. They're just kind of random. It would take a long time to report all this. So if you just put it in a graph, you don't even have to say anything, and the viewer can look for themselves and kind of see what's where and kind of if there's anything interesting that they notice. And remember, you don't have to explain anything about the results yet. You're just stating what they are. So you won't have to explain anything about this until you get to the discussion. So then the second category, which is the blue category, is expanding on the facts. So this is your introduction and discussion sections. So in these ones, you're explaining the relevance of both the problem or the research question and your findings. So it puts the results into context and tells the reader why they should care. So these are kind of the meatier sections where you'll have to do a little bit of thinking about what your results mean and kind of what the topic is and what's important about it. So kind of just an overview to start with interpreting statistics. So if you don't know what a test means, you're not going to be able to explain your results. So I'd always start, once you have the test, look at the p-value for significance. Because if it's not significant, you're not going to have to care about like what the specific number means that you got for the test, for the correlation, or for anything like that, because it's not significant, so the specific number doesn't really matter. Then look back to your notes. So look at like, what does this test measure? So what does the value mean? And then what kind of do the numbers mean? So positive versus negative, large versus small, is it, even if it's significant, like does it have a big effect or does it not really matter even though it is significant? So then kind of backing up to the introduction, here's the questions that I'd ask. So 1, what background knowledge is important for this topic? So obviously the topic is pretty broad, but there's probably something you need to kind of introduce first, especially about kind of the area that your research question is in. So then the second one is, what am I trying to find out, which is your research question. Third, why is this topic relevant? So basically you want to tell your reader why they should care before they read your entire thing instead of leaving it until last, which would kind of, I mean, they'd still get it, but they wouldn't really care or be invested in reading your report and if they didn't know from the start why it's important. And then 4 is, what do I think will happen? So this is your research hypothesis. So if you've been into the Writing Center for any other form of academic writing, and if you've talked with us about introductions, you'll know we usually use kind of a funnel diagram to describe how this looks. So you kind of start broad and then you get narrow at the end. So like in some kind of textual analysis paper, you kind of start broad, introducing the topic, and then you'd end with your thesis. Now, hypothesis obviously has thesis in it. It's kind of the same thing, just for this, instead of kind of what you're arguing, it's what you're proving or disproving. So you'll start broad with context and then kind of get narrower, narrowing the topic down, and end with your research hypothesis. And then moving on to the discussion, which is what I'd personally write last, maybe the introduction last, depending on which we feel like doing more. So then the questions to ask for this: what do the results mean? Do the results support or reject my hypothesis? What is a possible explanation why? So if it does support your hypothesis, you may not have to talk too much about the explanation why, because you've probably already introduced your thought process and your reasoning for why you have your hypothesis as such. But if it rejects it, you should definitely include if there's anything about the data set that could have caused this, like if there's a really small sample size, or if there's anything you didn't previously consider that could have affected it, that you kind of realized later while you were thinking about it for this section. And then moving on, the last thing you should kind of end with is the what else should be done moving forward. So like we say with conclusions in the Writing Center, which of course the discussion isn't exactly a conclusion because you're still kind of doing a lot of your analysis in this section, but it can kind of be a similar thing, is we talk about it as a reverse funnel or a triangle or a pyramid, whatever you'd like to call it. So starting kind of back narrow, restating your thesis, but in this case, you'll be saying, do I support or reject my hypothesis, basically restating that hypothesis, and then giving a possible explanation why, and then kind of broadening out into other interesting findings like you've found, and then ending with the potential steps moving forward. So basically ending on like the moving forward, going out into the world, here's what could be done, what I could do, what someone else could do, what would be an interesting aspect to look at, what should have more research done about it, anything like that. So thank you for listening to me ramble for probably 10 minutes. If you have any questions, contact the Writing Center. There's our email there. If you want, you can contact your professor and he can hook you up with like a specific writing fellow too. He can give you my email if you want, and you can ask me anything in case I didn't make sense anywhere. And then also, we are currently open online, even though none of us are on campus right now. You can book appointments at mywconline.com, and these, you don't have to like set up an actual hour to meet face with face. You can actually just send something in and we can give comments and feedback and get it back to you that within the next couple days, depending on the day that you sign up. So it's a little bit different, and I know it's really hard right now. Hopefully this helped some in any way. And yeah, please reach out to us if you have any other questions. Thank you.